So I wanted to give a brief heads up that I will very, very briefly during this talk be saying a little bit about race-related violence. And I just wanted to name that in case, just so that it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, and so that everyone can do whatever you need to take care of yourself around that. We have moved from metta, where we orient toward the goodness of all beings and wish them well, to compassion, where we orient to the suffering of beings and wish that they be free from that and from the causes of that. And Dawn spoke so beautifully about how that wishing can be actually a joyful feeling, warm, light, open, and how compassionate action can flow from that. And yet, as we orient toward suffering and really connect with it, other reactions and experiences often arise, right? Our hearts can really shatter and break. And our protective layers can feel like they're just cracking and falling away. I've been thinking about how, from a pretty young age, I was often oriented to the suffering of those around me. And I cared about it. I felt for it. I really didn't want people to suffer. I definitely didn't always understand why they did or why there was cruelty, but I knew there was. And I would often try to help or stand up for kids who were being made fun of or bullied. And when it was me who was being made fun of, I somehow could sense into the insecurity and vulnerability of those who were doing that to me and could care for them. And I have no idea how I did that, but I believe in retrospect that it helped protect my heart from taking in what they were saying and also from developing hatred toward them. But there were definitely moments in my early life where I was exposed to or connected with suffering on a scale that I really couldn't hold, and where something in me really broke open. There was one instance where my parents took me on a trip to New York City, and we didn't usually visit cities. And at one point during the trip, I just dissolved into tears. The buildings were too big, there was concrete and steel everywhere. And I was most distressed and confused by seeing people sleeping on benches and in doorways. And I remember just kind of saying, why aren't they given homes? Why aren't they given beds? I don't understand this. This isn't right. And I just absolutely couldn't hold it. And perhaps the most kind of profoundly shattering experience for me that's really stayed with me my whole life is that my parents watched with me the docuseries Eyes on the Prize. I think it was the late 80s or early 90s. And all of it was amazing. There was one particular part that focused on Emmett Till. And most of you may know, in 1955, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy or child, adolescent, visiting family in Mississippi. And he was accused of flirting with a white woman, either looking at her or whistling at her. And the next day, that woman's husband and 3 other white men tracked him down and beat him and tortured him, shot him, and threw him in a river. And in the series, I never forgot that his mother decided to have an open casket at his funeral. And she said that that was because she wanted the world to see what they had done to her child. And in the series, for a moment, they showed him in the casket, and something just broke. I absolutely couldn't take in or understand how people could do anything like that to a being, to a kid only a couple years older than me at that time. And I've learned since then that his mother's decision to have an open casket actually meant that so many people, particularly in Black communities in this country, saw that image. And that in some ways that is attributed with energizing the civil rights movement at that time. So compassionate action following from that collective shattering and pain. And it made me think also a little bit of what's been happening in this country. It's really ongoing, it's never ended. But with the murder of George Floyd and the collective witnessing of that also seemed to bring a shattering and a breaking open. Not that people didn't know racism existed or that there weren't people fighting against it, but again, that it sort of broke something else open, a new layer of that, and was part of energizing the Black Lives Matter movement, compassionate action, again. And I've been trying to find words for what is that shattering? What does that feel like? And I don't think there are actually any words for it, but certainly grief, incredible grief, horror, fear, rage. I think as a kid, I felt a lot of confusion and overwhelm, really couldn't hold it. So when our hearts shatter or crack open, when we connect with the pain and suffering in this world, we are really in the company of gods. We are on the path to being a bodhisattva. And so I want us to take heart in that. And some of you may have heard of Avalokiteshvara. It's an embodiment in Buddhism of compassion, bodhisattva. And in bodhisattva is a being who could reach full enlightenment, right? Be gone forever, never returning, but stays in this world to continue to help suffering beings be free. And so Avalokiteshvara took that vow, felt very confident in it, expansive in it, and he vowed to his teacher, Amitabha, if I should ever get discouraged in this work, may my body be shattered into 1,000 pieces. Right? Should he waver in his compassionate aspiration, may he shatter into 1,000 pieces. So the story as he goes, he's helping and healing and caring for the suffering of beings. And over time, he becomes pretty discouraged, actually. And at one point, he actually just breaks down and weeps. And from his tears, each one, a goddess was born, one white and one green. And these are the two Taras. And they said, we'll help you. It's okay, calm down, keep going. And for a while, he was able to do that, right? A couple of lifetimes, he continued, but he was starting to get more and more exhausted and frustrated and discouraged. And finally, there was a moment where he just said, these evil, violent people, they're insatiable. No matter how peaceful and loving I am, it has no effect. And in that moment, his body was instantly shattered into 1,000 pieces. And Amitabha came and gathered those pieces together and gave Avalokiteshvara 1,000 arms and 12 heads so that he could continue his work. So, what does this story teach us? I think of this story often and take great comfort in it, actually. But I think it's really clear, first, that it's actually really difficult to have compassion for all beings, particularly for human beings. And also that we have to watch out for trying to control or attachment to outcome when we're practicing compassion, right? All those conditionalities. He said, no matter what I do, it doesn't stop. And that's a really important teaching. We care for the suffering of beings and wish them to be free of it, not with the condition that it stop, but with the hope that it will. We're also reminded that in cultivating any Brahmavihara, the purification process means that its opposites will arise, right? So frustration, judgment, right? These people are insatiable, they're violent. Frustration, discouragement. And also that grief is a part of that process. His tears. And that all of those feelings must be seen and heard. And I also take from it that shattering actually is also part of our process of developing compassion. That as we orient to suffering, our hearts will break. That might happen. I think about him being given all those arms and hands, and maybe some of you have seen the images, and how it might be easy for us to assume that that means that he could just do more, right? He could give more. I should be able to just do more. I should have 1,000 hands to give and give and give and do. And I think that's part of it. But also that the 12 heads is a way of reminding us that we need to keep perspective, see all sides, have some way of gaining some elevation. And the arms and hands so that we can hold more. Just hold more. And compassion is care infused with wisdom. And in my experiences that I shared, when I think about these moments when my heart has really cracked open, actually there has been a lot of wisdom and clarity there, even as a kid. I was sensing into things that were true. One, real shattering of any ways that we protect ourselves from the truth of suffering in this world, right? There's no way in those moments that we can deny the truth of that. And also, even if I couldn't have put words to it, there was a knowing and a clarity about our oneness. That the suffering of one being is the suffering of all. That the suffering of every being matters. And that no one is truly free until all are free from suffering. And that's really the vow of a bodhisattva. And I believe when our hearts shatter, we do sense into those two truths, the truth of suffering and the truth that all beings should be free of it and from the causes of it. So I know I often wish or like to think that I can skip right into the kind of calm, beatific compassion, right? Even that's right behind me with Kuan Yin, right? And I think more and more that the process of cultivating compassion is really messy and difficult and painful, and grief and anger and confusion, all of these things and more may be part of our process and our path. So thank you.